And I
Right.
think you kind of hit it on the head, right? Like what I found was happening very early in my career, I thought, okay, I have to be unbiased. I can't show emotion. I have to build a wall around my heart because if I don't, then I will not be able to get through a newscast without crying because of the things that I was seeing. And so, year after year, I really did an excellent job of walling off my emotions. And when I started to work with mushrooms, magic mushrooms, that wall crumbled and I broke down on television multiple times. I started to kind of lose my shit. And it was, I think, all a sign from the universe to be like, all right, baby, like it's time to move on. Because that's not a way to live. It's not okay to not have emotions and not feel your feelings. But I did such a great job for probably 10 to 12 years of always flatlining emotions where I was just fine, like a little robot. And then I would like wonder why I would get blackout drunk on the weekends and not remember things.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.
Hi, guys. Welcome back to Neff Inspiration, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stephan Neff. Another fantastic day for an interview. I've got Leslie Draffin with me. Leslie is an amazing woman. She is a psychedelic guide, an integrative somatic coach, a meditation teacher, feminine embodiment mentor, a whole number of beautiful tasks she has given herself to help others to get into the light, to get out of the darkness, and to give meaning and purpose to their life. Now, she comes from a very different background. She has been a hardcore journalist, a TV anchor, and has lived a very, very different life. So I can't wait to see why and how this transformation has occurred. So, Leslie, thank you very much for being a guest on my show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, excellent. Wow. How did you become a TV anchor? I mean, this is not something that just happens. Were you always fascinated to be in the limelight, in the show, the center of the show?
Uh, Maybe. I certainly, as a kid, really enjoyed writing and was fortunate enough to have at my school this little morning announcements team that I was on in, I think, fifth or sixth grade. So the TV bug bit me pretty early. But I was coming up not really knowing if I wanted to do magazines or if I wanted to do broadcast journalism. And then magazines crumbled here in the States. And I decided to go the TV route. But I really feel like part of me always wanted to be a storyteller. As part of me always wanted to ask questions. My mom said I was asking full sentence questions by 1 year old. So I think I was just born to talk to people.
Beautiful. Did that give you fulfillment? Was that your passion?
Certainly in some ways. Yeah. In some ways, I think for sure it did make me very fulfilled. And in other ways, I realized, towards the end of my career that I was playing a news anchor on TV. I was playing this person that I had created, this identity that I put a lot of emphasis on and importance on, and really tied my worth up into how successful I was, and had to do a lot of, yeah, healing from that idea of like, who am I if I'm not this?
Ooh, how many of us seek external validation
Mhm.
just to make sense of the world? Guilty as charged. My goodness. Okay. So you became successful. You are in Texas, in the United
Yes.
States, and the news anchor. I'm not familiar with this profession. So as a news anchor, yes, I guess you are uh, being given the information that you then present.
Yeah.
But I know that that is not all of your story. I mean,
Right.
you also were on the cold front and were out there seeing things that otherwise get blurred in modern television.
Mhm.
How how was that all?
You know, what I think my journalism career taught me is that um, we all need better tools to care for our mental health, because what I was seeing in my everyday life were the worst parts of humanity. You know, when you watch the news, the person reading the news to you, that was who I was. But I also went out there with a camera and interviewed people on the streets. I would knock on people's doors who were accused of murder. I would track down child molesters. It was a little bit of anything and everything, especially early in my career. And then when the pandemic hit here in the States, you know, I was the essential anchor. I was the one who went to work and everyone else was at home. And so every phone call was fielded through me. Every person who needed to email, like I was the person who was
Wow.
really absorbing so much more fear from the general public, especially the elderly community, because they were so scared. And so that was, I think, when I really started to burn out. Not only was I working a lot more, but I was taking on so much more trauma from other people. And in the midst of that, we also had here in the States so much racial violence. We had mass shootings in the form of children getting murdered at their school. One happened about 2 hours from me. And so the images that I saw were really bad, but it was like the pain in people's voices that I couldn't shut off at night. And that's why I abused alcohol. It's why I starved myself for years. And why, even though I was in traditional talk therapy and at times prescribed medications for anxiety and depression, it just didn't seem to really work that well until I started to explore psychedelic medicine.
Wow. And we keep underestimating the toll it takes on us when we are witness to horrendous things. So many of us uh, would never say that they suffer from the effects of trauma because really their friend was not blown up in front of them
Right.
on a battlefield, or they were not threatened with something that their mind perceives as a threat to their life. These are all, if
Yeah.
you go through the tick boxes of PTSD, these are sort of the things that you will find in there, and yet here you are actually being very much affected.
Mhm.
Did you realize it at the time?
No, and when my psychiatrist told me that he thought I had PTSD at first, I sort of what you were saying, I was like, well, nothing really that bad has happened to me.
Mm,
But in the subsequent trainings that I have gone through and the books that I have read and the coaches and therapists I've worked with since then, what I really understand is that trauma doesn't have anything to do with what actually happened to you. It's all
mm,
about how you handle it afterwards and how you perceive it. And so for me to have been in a journalism career for 15 years where every single day it was happening over
mm,
and over
mm,
again,
mm,
often multiple times a day, it was sort of just that long onslaught of maybe little traumas
mm,
that just really started to disconnect me from myself. And I couldn't get out of my forward thinking anxiety, fear, worry, constantly worried the other shoe was going to drop, something was going
mm,
to get me,
mm,
and
mm.
felt it really difficult to feel happy about life. Even though I was making six figures, I was at the top of my career. It still felt so stuck and just, yeah, disconnected.
One of the reasons for that might very well be that you are there and you have zero control over what is happening out there. Yet you're
Mhm.
taking it on so much, and you really put the lens on the negative things that are happening around you. And you're doing so with a professional attitude, and you think that somehow protects you from what you're hearing and what you're seeing.
And I think
Right.
you kind of hit it on the head, right? Like what I found was happening very early in my career. I thought, okay, I have to be unbiased. I can't show emotion. I have to build a wall around my heart because if I don't, then I will not be able to get through a newscast without crying because of the things that I was seeing. And so, year after year, I really did an excellent job of walling off my emotions. And when I started to work with mushrooms, magic mushrooms, that wall crumbled and I broke down on television multiple times. I started to kind of lose my shit. And it was, I think, all a sign from the universe to be like, all right, baby, like it's time to move on. Because that's not a way to live. It's not okay to not have emotions and not feel your feelings. But I did such a great job for probably 10 to 12 years of always flatlining emotions where I was just fine, like a little robot. And then I would like wonder why I would get blackout drunk on the weekends and not remember things.
Welcome to the world of frontline staff. Let that be soldiers, emergency people, paramedics, the policemen. There's so many men and women out there who are exactly going through the same thing. But many of us have never been taught to listen to our emotions. Many of us have never seen it being modeled in real life, and yet we somehow try to live with the ever increasing pain on our soul. It's just I'm so sorry to hear that you went through that, but at the same token, I'm so grateful for you, and it's beautiful that you had that exposure to the negativity, because you're now a woman who just oozes the positivity, oozes the joy and the passion of living her life to the fullest. And I think that is something. This is beautiful. And without the darkness in your life, you would have not appreciated the light.
Right.
And wow, how did you get started with psychedelics?
So I first heard about them from my boss, actually, when I was still in television. And I'd heard about them before, but I was raised in the States in the deep South. My dad's a preacher, very conservative, very much like drugs are bad.
Mm,
You'll go to hell if you do drugs.
yeah.
Like that frying pan and the egg commercial. I don't know if you guys had that over there, but we had it here. And so I never even experimented with anything until my 30s, like at all. And my boss was actually, and I love, like, I'm still friends with him now, even after I left a couple of years ago. He was like really into the Grateful Dead. And he told me that he wanted me to do a story on microdosing. And I'm like, well, how am I going to do a story on magic mushrooms when it's illegal? And that's all, that was like the whole, like, that's it. That was like one little conversation. I never like explored it until about a year and a half later. I heard someone talking on a podcast about how psilocybin, aka magic mushrooms, can be really helpful for sexual trauma.
Mm,
So what we haven't really spoken about yet is that I had an experience when I was 18 where I was diagnosed with herpes right after my first
mm,
sexual experience with my long-term boyfriend. And
uh,
so that really, as a preacher's daughter,
mm,
sent me into a massive shame spiral. And I really credit that for why I became so addicted to achieving, because I had this story in my head that if I'm so good and I'm so um, successful, well, of course you're going to love me. How could you
uh,
not? So I'd heard that microdosing could help with working through sexual shame and sexual trauma. So I hired this coach and I started to work with her, not really even understanding how many benefits it can also have for mental health. But what the mushrooms did is they gave me what I needed, not necessarily what I wanted. And so when I started working with them in very early 2022, while I was still a news anchor, they were like, we're not going to even touch the sexual stuff. We're going to go straight for your mental health because you are suffering. And pretty quickly, I was able to navigate the anxiety and the depression and the PTSD pharmaceutical free by working therapeutically with these psychedelic mushrooms. And like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, shit got real fast. Like, in a couple of months, I took a sabbatical from my job. Um, Experienced intense amounts of grief and loss through some other personal things, eventually decided never to go back to the job, had to grieve that. But
mm,
that was a huge catalyst year for me because while I'd been doing the work of really becoming, whole and remembering who I am since probably 2019, 2022, I think was really the year that really just catapulted me into the life path that I'm on today.
beautiful. And we need to be quite clear here. I want to strongly distinguish um, people going out there onto a rave and experimenting. Ooh, that's the okay, I'll take some.
Yeah.
God knows what the hell you're getting. Number one. Number two, microdosing my ass. That is certainly not what Leslie is describing here. What you're describing is using a a, a drug that really is a drug of dependency in the past that has been around since the late 60s from memory when it was first described, and there were a lot of people who experimented then, but this was all a very different world. These were the psychonauts who had a really good go and see what substances did what to their imagination, their brain.
Mhm.
Nowadays, what we have recognized is that similar substances to psilocybin, like MDMA, are used in very small doses as part of a therapeutic approach to actually work with a trained counselor professional to actually address trauma and to address the root causes that are sending you in a tailspin. This is not even on the same planet as the psychonauts and as those things that you might have heard, or the conceptions that you have got about psilocybin. So now that we've got that out of the way, so very, very good. And increasingly, this is a recognized therapy out there, and the benefits are there in study after study after study. So I think that is so important to say. And you indeed, you started being the patient and saw the massive and rapid challenges that you now were facing of actually feeling your emotions, letting them out, let the walls crumble, and suddenly here you are. How was it to feel those emotions? I mean, to suddenly feel those tears, was that a release? Was that a relief?
Mm.
Or was that actually, were you ashamed of crying?
Oh, I definitely have shame around crying. I definitely credit that with the way that I was raised. Like I'm very much a person who doesn't like to cry in front of people. That's
Mhm.
why it was so triggering to cry on television,
Ah,
where
right.
thousands of people were watching. Um, but I think, in the beginning, I'm not sure. So, what's interesting about the way that I worked with them is I did microdose for about a month, and then I did a fuller dose journey, so enough to hallucinate.
Mhm.
And in that journey, I really was able to see some things that were holding me back, that were really like keeping me stuck in this place in my life where I felt unsure of myself. It was on my birthday, and that I think was when the feelings actually started to sort of cascade, but still I was just like white knuckling life, like
Mhm.
hard. I was hanging on so tight and trying to keep it all bottled up. And then I had a dog die really suddenly, and then 6 weeks later another dog died. And so the grief and the sadness did start to come out. And then I realized in the tears and the crying for those animals, oh, you never grieved the divorce that you had and the deep betrayal that you had in your late 20s. You didn't really grieve the herpes thing. Like you really didn't sit with that. You just drank alcohol, partied as a college kid, and like tried to get straight A's. And so all of that came flooding back. And then I also felt these feelings of like birth trauma, and I'm adopted, so there was all of that like mixed in there. So it felt like total shit. It was the worst, and I would not change it for like the world, because now I feel so much more better able to access emotions when I need to. And I think really, you can't feel joy if you're not going to feel pain. Like if you are just going to sit there feeling like blah, like this just static line, you're not going to feel the highs. because you won't feel the lows. So I really found in myself and my experience that I had to be willing to go into the darkness and into the depths in order to see the light as well. But it did not feel good. And that was why I was so happy to have a therapist and a coach and very supportive husband to really help walk me through that. And why eventually I started to use it in my work as well and got trained in this modality too.
Wow. And I love it how you said it. But here you are, suddenly exposed to those emotions that you had been running away from for such a long time, for the better part of 2 decades. You've been running away with your work. You were a workaholic, and then you were an alcoholic. And now you suddenly throw all the toys out of the cot. Was there no temptation to actually use alcohol with the psilocybin?
Yeah. So I didn't get sober in 2022 yet. So
Oh.
my last drink was December 25th of 2022. So I started working with psilocybin early that year.
Mhm.
And I had already been exploring sober curiosity since 2020. But the longest I'd ever gone without drinking was about 4 months. And so in the midst of the microdosing, I would have a drink here and there. And then I would be very aware of like, why are you drinking? What are you feeling like you have to escape from? Where are those feelings
Mm,
come from? So I was able to like look
nice.
above to
Nice.
figure out the connection points. And that's where psilocybin helped a lot.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So it gave you that emotional awareness, that
Yes.
emotional knowledge to actually, the mindfulness to be able to step
Yes.
outside and look down onto the situation. Beautiful. Because that
Hmm.
is something, that is really where the magic happens. That's
Yes.
where we change and where we suddenly get the insight and think, okay, these are the aha moments
Yeah.
in our lives. Oh, beautiful. Wow. I'm so pleased for you that you had this exposure. And you speak certainly very positively about psychedelics. Now,
Yeah.
psychedelics can also give you a rather bad trip. Were there
Yeah.
ever bad?
Challenging. I like to say challenging trips.
Okay, tell us.
I think that, and you sort of talked about it early, right? Like, as a person who was a member of the media, I just want to say that sometimes you cannot trust all the things that the media tells you. And so when I look back at the stories that came out in the 50s and 60s around the psychonauts and about the folks losing their minds and the people who were addicted to these drugs, first of all, I have to have, the questioners, the curious, like explorer of how much of this is for sure true.
Mm.
And if it is true, why? And so I think a bad trip happens when you don't prepare, when you don't know what you're ingesting, when you're not in the proper place to ingest that medicine, and when you're not willing to release control. Because I had a pretty challenging trip in the latter part of 2022. After my two dogs had died, I was still drinking at this point, not nowhere near as heavily as I had done it in my 20s. But I went through that experience and I really wanted to just like hold on. I was like, I don't want to like feel all the emotions, although I said I did. And I got so irritated and pissed off in that entire journey here in my guest bedroom. Oh, I was so mad, and that felt really challenging to me, and
Mhm.
I certainly have stories of friends that I've known who went to a music festival and maybe they took some weird LSD or and
Mm.
now we have such a problem with fentanyl here in the States that I am pretty terrified to do anything.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
but yeah, I think the challenging and the bad trips really do come from, like I said, a lack of preparation, a lack of, um, ability to release control and trust.
Mm.
And when you're doing it, like you said before, in a place that's like a music festival with with a ton of people and full dose journeys, much more likely to induce bad or challenging trips than
Mm.
microdosing, which is one
Mm.
reason why microdosing is, I think, so much more popular. It's a bit more gentle. And again, on the therapeutic side of things, both work to achieve a goal. I like to say, like, if you have a glass of water and you turn the faucet on and you're doing it in a drip, water will
Mm.
eventually fill the cup.
Mhm.
That's microdosing. You can turn the faucet on full blast and fill that cup up really fast, and you might have stuff exploding out the top. That's a full dose journey. Each thing will get you to potentially where you want to go. It's just the speed and the gentleness that you want to take into account depending on where you are in your life.
And in all fairness, trauma comes in layers. You have spoken about little mini traumas, but on a consistent basis, coupled with this. How shall I call your personality? There's the person that you took on, this professional. Oh yeah, and we have got another 2 shootings with 15 other bystanders affected. Blah blah blah. And now we go to the weather.
Yeah.
So
That was me.
no emotions, no nothing. But deep underneath there, you've got the trouble. So there's trauma comes in layers. The healing, I believe, needs to come in layers. If you suddenly rip off all the Band-Aids, revealing all the festering wounds, wow, no surprise that maybe you get overwhelmed with what you see and what you feel. Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. So how was your journey to learn more about that? Because you're still a patient and you're seeing the benefits. You could argue, are these benefits? Because you essentially lost your career. I'm playing devil's advocate. I know the answer there already, but having said that, I mean, how was it? You created new trauma because you were essentially leaving your job. Was there actually an argument that also your bosses did not like that you suddenly were showing emotions?
Okay. So interestingly enough, I take a 3-month leave of absence. And the way that in the States it works is you have something that it's called FMLA, which is you can't be fired while you're on that. And so I had that for like 11 weeks and I was going to be gone a total of 12 weeks. So that 1 week at the end was something called short-term disability. And I got an email from our HR department that my contract was not going to be renewed. And I was like 97% sure I was not going to go back. But I just see that as the universe, like saying, you know, honey, if you have a 3% worry that you're going to regret this, that you're going to think this is the wrong decision, we'll just take it from you so that you can think that it's taken from you. So it's not exactly your choice and give you the freedom to like breathe. Because I felt like I kind of needed that, but it was certainly an aha moment. And this is sort of just like corporate world in general. Like they don't give a shit about you. Like your job does not care about you. They did not care about my mental health. They were mad that I was talking about how journalism had damaged my mental health. And I found this out like from other people who still worked there. The boss was very upset that it was making them look bad. So yeah, I definitely did create additional trauma by leaving. Because I also lost that income. You know, my husband had just started his own business and thankfully we had some savings, but like I was the breadwinner. And so pulling that rug out from under us was scary, but fortunately, you know, I read this really great book called It's Not Your Money by Tosha Silver, which basically talks about like when you're holding on so tightly to what you think you want, you're losing out on all the other opportunities. And all you have to do is just open your palm for abundance to come to you. And like these little interesting things would happen where like someone would offer me a part-time job or I'd get like a freelance gig. And so these signs were coming in that I was doing the right thing. But like, I know people on the internet thought I was batshit. Like they definitely were like, she has everything. Why would she leave? And fortunately, they were a lot quieter than the group that was very proud of me for talking openly about how bad it was, for talking about PTSD and anxiety from a news anchor's perspective, and being really open and honest and authentic about the fact that I just didn't want to do it anymore. And that was it.
Brilliant.
And they probably also didn't love that. So I also have my own podcast where I like to cuss. Maybe they didn't like that either. Like I'd had that going on for several years. Because I wasn't even talking about psychedelics in the time of 2022 online at all. I was talking about menstrual cycle coaching, which I had done on the side. They said it was an ethical violation. Is why they were gonna not renew my contract. I'm like, ethics, you're the unethical. This whole industry is unethical. So very funny turn of
Oh,
phrase that.
interesting. Oh no, this is basically trying to grasp at anything that they can use against you.
Mhm.
And at the same token, also looking at anything that possibly could be a risk to the organization and
Yeah.
minimizing that risk. So it's both of these things happening at the same time. Oh, brutal, brutal. I think, having said that, your transformation obviously had started much earlier because you
Mhm.
sought outlets of creativity. You sought uh, taking back control, because there you were in a scenario for 15 years where you had bugger all control of what was happening to you, and you
Yeah.
just had to roll with the punches. Yet here, by taking on control, by helping others, giving service to others, both in the form of your podcast as well as in your coaching abilities. Now, that is a beautiful breath of fresh air compared with the other person, the other Leslie that was
Mhm.
working there, the other persona within you, in you. And we all have got these personas. We all have got these different people, and some of them are really good because they bring us money and stability and security, but they often lack the mission, the passion, the drive, they don't align with what we find out that we really meant to do. And but that is so scary to actually first realize, who do you really want to be, and then actually following that dream and creating a vision and making that a mission. So here you were. And it's intriguing for me because you're a certified psychedelic coach. So you didn't just go out there and play a bit around. We already noted that you actually did all that under the guidance of someone who was experienced. How was that new transformation where you actually became the coach, where you actually learned about that? Did that change your relationship with psilocybin or with those group of drugs?
What a great question. I think, yeah, it has definitely changed my relationship with the medicine, because when I was working with my own coach, I knew what was happening, but I wasn't super into looking at the science, and I wasn't super into needing to know why. I just trusted that it was going to work, and it did. And then when I started training in late 2022, and especially I did a 5-month intensive training with a group in the States called Access Mundi. One is a therapist, and I think the other one, not licensed anymore, but was a psychologist. I really started to build what I call like a partnership with mushrooms, where I gave a lot of gratitude to them and a lot of reverence to them, and gave, just thanks to the fact that they were here to help me heal. And I did a really intensive microdosing protocol on myself with obviously the tools I was being given during this training. And I had set this intention of I take my precious time. Like, I just take my time. I take my time. And as a news anchor, we never took our time. Everything was rushing. My whole life has been rushing. And so that was probably the most transformative 2-month period in early 2023, was just taking my time, letting things come as they needed to come. That was really when I started to heal my masculine and feminine energy imbalance, because I had been so solidly in my masculine energy for my whole life. It's where I lived. That's where I knew, like, I felt good and quote unquote safe there. And so that was really, I think, where the groundwork started to be laid for my relationship with this medicine. And to be honest, I have microdosed on and off for as much as a month since then, but I have not microdosed any significant amount of time since early 2023. Like, I would say in total since then, we're talking now in May of 2024, probably another 3 months total microdosing if I really added it all up. But that was such an interesting and transformative time for me. That's also right when I started. When I had my last drink, like, I went, and like my first class was like the very next week with this training. And we're still sober now. So that was very much like when my relationship started to change. And I started to see these little sacred teachers, these fungi, as just here to open the door to my own healing and help hold me as I walk through it.
Beautiful. And the teacher will appear when the student is ready. So here you are. There were times when you're ready to heal, and you went through this beautiful time when you actually took time to expose yourself, to be vulnerable, to be honest to yourself, to not be distracted by life. Now, not many people feel they have that opportunity, but sometimes, too often, new trauma arrives that forces people to actually face their reality, face their demons. And yeah, if you still enjoy their presence, it's hard to get rid of those demons.
Mm-hmm.
Intriguing. And I love it what you're saying, because healing comes in layers, and you have done shitloads of it. And so quite a few of the demons have been laid to rest. But over time, no doubt, new trauma will arise, and maybe old trauma that you have so far not even realized that it was there and that it actually has impacted you will raise its ugly head. And again, then you have got the ability to draw upon this treatment modality. But I mean, there are other tools though that you're using. It's not just the microdosing. You're not just having found this new hammer and now everything is a nail. When would you use microdosing as part of your work as your coach? And what other modalities do you add in, or rather say, maybe not for you?
Yeah. I spent so much of my life disconnected from my body and not understanding, like I was so good in my head, but from the neck down, I was not safe. And so somatic work was so essential. Seriously. Like, of course I lived in my head. Come on.
That's beautifully said.
And so when I started to research somatics back in 2019, 2020, and embodiment practices, it was really, again, with this hope that it would help me with my sexual shame and my body image issues. And so I finally took a really extensive training on that last year, which I felt like was necessary in one way, but also I felt like I'd been doing this work and integrating it into my life for so many years beforehand. But somatics and psychedelics together are really what I work with a lot. And somatics, in the most basic level, is helping people understand and notice the sensations in their body, and then traveling into those sensations to see what they may have to say to us. Because most of our feelings start in our body. 80% or so are in the body. And then our mind makes up a story, and our mind is so loud that we think, oh, the mind is what makes the thing. That's not true. It's the sensations within ourselves, but we just don't have the language. So somatic work is what I use pretty constantly. Sometimes folks know that's what I'm doing. Sometimes I just like sneak it in. Meditation is also almost a constant presence when I'm working with clients. And earlier last year, I worked with some teenagers around their menstrual cycle specifically. That's why their dad hired me. But what came up almost immediately was understanding emotions and how to, function, I guess, in this society. So our menstrual cycle work was like one class. Most of what we did was somatics and meditation with a 14 and a 17-year-old. So, and then
Beautiful.
later on in the year, I did work with that. She had turned 18 and we microdosed together. I led her through a microdosing protocol because she was still suffering with some things like negative self-talk and low body image. But I think as far as who I don't think this is for, and I've had some folks come to me, and I won't work with them, or I'll say not now. People going through immense amounts of grief, people who are in an acute state of pain or sadness, because we know that microdosing can expand those feelings and make them even more difficult. People who don't have a very strong support system, or who haven't been to therapy yet. because I really felt like talk therapy was such a great foundational place to start.
Mm.
And I also think that really smart, self aware people get stuck in talk therapy because you can't talk about your trauma to heal it. That's not how it works. You've got to, in my opinion, really start to look at the subconscious layers. And a lot of times, cognitive behavioral therapy won't get there. And so that's where somatics can be really impactful and clearly psychedelics.
It's so important to talk about what has happened because let's be clear about it. You have got 80,000 thoughts every day. And these are nebulous kind of things that go on in your head and that then, without you even knowing, trigger some things in your body. It's chaos up there. So to actually talk about it, or even better, journal it, writing things down, that is such a powerful way of giving a name to those nebulous things. So talk therapy, definitely important. But at the same token, you're right. People who can talk a lot, we have some mental constructs that we then create and work with, and it's all quite pretty. But one of the best ways of actually refocusing on what is really important is actually to allow your feelings and your emotions to be there. And there are exercises, when they are done well and with the right guidance, that you actually really visualize some deeply painful scenario, situation, and truly imagine everything about it, and actually let the feelings that are linked to that come up, and then sit with these feelings for 3 minutes to actually really allow you to feel them, allow the body responses. I've done that recently again, and it was actually one of the most scariest times because I'm still very much tempted to run away from those feelings. I'm very much tempted to numb them, to do whatever I need to do. In this case, I forced myself, I allowed myself to feel those emotions and allow that wave of panic and fear to subside, and then nurture myself afterwards. And it was brutal, but beautiful to deal with that fear. And here you are expressing very similar things, those emotions, to let them be but under the right guidance. That needs to be stressed so much. You can't just say, okay, come on, feel those feelings. And next thing you decompensate, you suffer.
Yeah. Disassociate.
Ah, how can we, as a society, move forward? Where can we start? Because, I mean, on the one hand, there are people out there who say everyone has trauma, therefore everyone needs microdosing. It needs to be in the water. Yeah, right. And then there are other people who still say, no, hang on, that is all mumbo jumbo. That is actually dangerous. This is just another drug of dependence.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the truth? How can we go about that?
Where is the truth? Honestly, as someone who has tried to find the truth her whole life and dedicated 15 years to finding the truth, I
Yeah.
think the first thing you do is you start to question it. Question it and figure out what the truth is for you. Because your truth may be very different from my truth. I think that just asking those questions and getting curious, right? Whether it be about the conversation around microdosing or psychedelics, or not. Maybe it's about your own past, getting curious and questioning, what it is that you feel. I would say, if folks are listening, the thing I would suggest they do first is get curious about what your sensations in your body are doing right now. Because a lot of times we want to jump into, what is this feeling I'm feeling? Okay, I'm feeling a little nervous. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling worried. But what is the sensation in your body first showing you? Okay, is my heart racing a little bit? Okay, and the story I'm telling myself now is that, oh, shoot, I'm really nervous about having this conversation with somebody. I feel a pit in my stomach. So when we can start to slow down enough and get curious about what's happening in our body, first, before we allow ourselves to throw in a feeling or an emotion on it, I really think that that can help us continue to be curious about
Mhm.
what's happened now in the past, and help us reconnect to where a lot of these things live, right? Because we think it lives all in our head. And the truth of it is, and we're seeing so much of this now, right? Like
Mm.
the body keeps the score. Your trauma is held in your tissues, your fascia. If you've ever had a deep tissue massage and cried your eyes out, like, whether or not like that's part of the reason. Maybe it hurt, but also there could have been stored things in your body. It happens to me every time I have a massage.
Oh,
And so I think that's where you start.
mm,
Get a little bit more curious. And obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you're a curious person anyway. But that would be,
mm,
I think, what I would suggest. And that's certainly what started my journey years and years ago, is being curious about the spiritual world, being
mm.
curious about what else is there. There has to be more to life than this. What is it? And you will find what is meant for you.
Beautiful. A very nice answer there. The issues lie in the tissues, and we should start with that. I like the idea of that. But it is a multifaceted approach. It's multi-pronged. You need to start somewhere. So if you were to meet another 18-year-old in a similar situation there, um, where do you think are the low-hanging fruits? I guess if we are now addressing the parents out there who are struggling with their teenagers, and
Mm.
where do you think that these parents might wish to go and wish to focus their attention?
Oh my goddess. Okay, so the reason I started talking about my herpes diagnosis is because of 18-year-old me, because
Mm,
I desperately needed this. So thank you
mm,
for asking this question. I think that, let me sit with this. I certainly needed to go to therapy earlier than I did.
mm,
And I think that that is fortunately, becoming for a lot of folks a more widely accepted place to start.
mm,
And again, like we've said before, it's probably not the end all be all, but that might be somewhere to explore. And I think what you may also want to start with is just giving each other some grace, giving yourself the grace to know that it's not a problem that you don't have all the answers. They really just want to feel safe. And how can you help them feel a little bit more safe?
mm.
Is it helping them go to therapy? Is it telling them that you love them regardless of what has happened? That is what my parents did, and then they never talked about it again. And so that was traumatizing. They kind of left me to my own devices. And so I guess that's where I would suggest starting is maybe thinking about what you yourself wanted at 18. Go back to your own inner child, because that's certainly like, I don't
Yeah.
have children, and yet I have nieces in my life and nephews in my life. And those
Mm,
little beings are like the mirrors to all of my shit. And I'm constantly faced with like my own inner self. So
mm,
maybe that's where you start, is giving yourself the grace to know that it's okay not to have all the answers, and maybe
mm,
think of what you yourself would have needed or wanted in a situation like that. And don't be afraid to reach out for
mm.
professional help in whatever way you can find it.
And I think I just had that breakthrough myself here. If your young ones are in trouble and needing help, it is very likely that you are in trouble and needing help as well. So I think thinking about that children are the mirrors to us, maybe that should be seen as a big sign from the universe that we need to get our own shit together, and that maybe what we are modeling might not be uh, in alignment with what we are either saying or the core beliefs that we hold true to. Wow, there is a lot of work to be done. Leslie, this is
I'm
an
literally, my mind is so blown right now about that. I'm just sitting there thinking about, yep, my own parental figures and how they avoided things. And then I just avoided things. So you hit the nail right on the head.
Oh my goodness, I love this show. I love to be here with people like you, because there is not one single day that I don't have aha moments. And sometimes they go like not just a light bulb, but actually like a big New Year's Eve celebration. And wow, okay, I'm amazed about the things that we've talked about today. Leslie, you are an amazing woman, a wonderful woman. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. If people want to know more about you, where can they find you?
I think the easiest thing would be to find me on Instagram. You can find me at Leslie Draffin or at Cyclical Microdosing Method.
Mm.
And if you're listening to this conversation and you want to talk one-on-one, I can give you a link for your show notes for a free one-on-one discovery call. This is the time when we can first answer any questions that you might have gotten from this conversation. But really, what I like to do in these 30-minute chats is figure out what's really holding you back in the moment and how either somatic psychedelic work or mindfulness could possibly help you, and whether or not we're a good fit. And if we're not, I have a team of interesting folks that I know that I can put you on to. You can also find me on my podcast, The Light Within. And I have some free guides too. If you're interested in learning more about how to microdose, I can send you some links for those too, if you want to put those in the notes.
Beautiful. Guys, look down there into the description of the YouTube video and of the podcast, because all of the notes, of the links are in the notes. So thank you so much, Leslie. You're an amazing, amazing guest. You're also an amazing woman. Have you figured out who you want to be when you grow up?
Me.
Beautiful. The new you, and whoever that may be.
Unapologetically. Yeah.
Exactly. And that is the freedom that we have. Every second we can have a choice. Not we can, we do have a choice. It's a privilege. And many of us just living kind of a numbed life. But when we start living with intention and really trying to figure out, what can I do right now to come closer to that new you? You might not know the whole new you, but you get an inkling. And what could you do right now to get a little bit closer to that, to heal a little bit more, or to lay a better foundation, to be more resilient against new trauma? There's so many things we can do. And you guys have done it already. You've listened to this video or listened to the podcast. I congratulate you for being a part of this journey that we are all on together to make this world a better place by making us better humans. So Leslie, again, thank you so much for being a guest on my show.
Thank you for having me.
And you guys out there, look after yourself and live with intention. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.